2 years on HRT today. It's pretty great. Specifically, I've been taking about 200 milligrams of spironolactone and 4 milligrams per day of estradiol, and that has resulted in a whole load of changes that I'm going to go through. So probably the best place and most obvious place to start would be with my chest. I now have fully formed actual breasts. I've not had to stuff or anything like that. These are actual formed squidgy breasts that exist, and yeah, I didn't know something like that could be so amazing. And when I actually got development there, I was really surprised by just how dysphoric I felt about having a flat chest. It was like a silent sort of pain sort of thing, having that flat chest. But that's gone now. I don't think I'll ever have that again, short of a double mastectomy, which, no thank you. Yeah, it's been a good position. According to different measures, like around different sort of systems of measurement, my breasts seem to come in anywhere between an A and a C cup of like whatever. It really tends to differ using the measurements and the sort of system. So whether that's imperial or the good one, forget its name, I guess because I take it for granted. But I'll put up the measurements for my chest in the comment area. Now, what would breasts be without having soft skin? And that has been, well, a question that I haven't had to actually ask, because softer skin was one of the very first changes I experienced on HRT. My skin itself was never particularly rough. I managed to get myself on HRT before it could actually roughen up, if that was ever going to happen. But actually experiencing the softness that came with HRT was really, really surprising. I didn't expect my skin to get softer than it already was, but it did, and it's very, very pleasant. Well, every change on HRT has been pleasant, but you understand, like, when you've not experienced what you can sort of more or less blossom into, it's a really big, amazing sort of experience when these little things happen, and I don't think I would give it up for the world. Now, this change I can't guarantee is part of HRT, but scarring is something that I've experienced on HRT that I haven't experienced prior to HRT in the same amount. I've gained a couple of scars while on HRT, despite having sort of less injuries than my entire teen years combined. So it's strange, not particularly unwelcome. Scars can look cool. Mine obviously don't, but you get the idea. It's not particularly negative. It's just a thing, I guess, maybe. Oh, but before I finish up, I should probably mention the final two changes, which are acne and sweat. Sweat is less common now, and it's also more difficult to smell, I think, because after a couple of days I'd be able to smell my body odor in my teenage years, whereas now I can't really smell it at all. But then again, I do shower properly, every day or every second day. Every second day, because it gets my hair looking the nicest. So, fun fact. And as for acne, the second of those changes, it's now more or less directly linked to how much crap food I eat. Like the days before. So I eat a lot less chocolate and sweets and stuff, because I know that I'll end up with, a whole load of spots anywhere on my body, from my legs to my face. It's not fun having that, so I'm happy to sort of give up the sweet food in order to maintain the sort of pleasantness of a lack of acne outbreaks. So, hair, given that it's in the frame, and probably the most obvious thing that you can see, I think we'll move into this area. So, whether the length has increased on HRT, like as in whether HRT has played into the increase in length, I'm not certain on. I haven't read any, journal articles or anything like that stating that that's a change that occurs. But it's definitely longer than it's ever been before, and I've only had about 6 haircuts in the last 3 years, so it's only about 6 inches shorter than it could be, potentially. I'm not really sure how the whole hair thing works. I'm not very skilled or astute in that regard, but it's definitely longer, and it's acted as a sort of validation. It makes me feel much more comfortable in my own skin, despite it getting tangled so easily and so often, and requiring, such a large amount of time with a comb and a brush and things like that to get it actually looking presentable outside of the house. Though there have been, times where I just don't bother and I go out and don't really mind, but it's nice to have it looking nice. It shines a lot better that way. I mean, I think it comes through in the video. I like it. It's probably one of my better features, honestly, given how I am not conventionally attractive. A face that's very odd, almost lazy eye, sort of like somebody took part of my face and sort of slid it up while it was sort of setting, I guess. But I've always been like that, so I've kind of gotten used to it. I can actually tie that into HRT because bone changes have occurred, but evidently they haven't sort of matched my face up a bit better. I have, got more obvious sort of cheekbony thingamajiggies, so that's been good. But yeah, overall it hasn't made me more attractive in getting the sides of my face a bit more symmetrical. Not everyone can be Jensen Ackles or some, attractive female actress will do as well. Though, I guess I could take this opportunity to move into more of the bone changes, which the most obvious of which has been my hips and that sort of area. So they've become more obviously feminine. They've grown widthwise. I've already experienced growth lengthwise in my pelvis, so it's like long and fat, but it's still, widened out, which has been very good. Makes pants a bit easier, though I'm still a bit small in that regard, so it's difficult to find pants that don't need a belt. The bone change has made wearing more clothes more accessible for me, though I am pretty crap at walking as a result of these bone changes. I've only recently become sort of accustomed to handling the sort of walking that comes with a wider frame, that walking with the sort of thinner, longer frame that stereotypically male body has. It's been a while since I've done human bio, so do forgive me if I make a couple of mistakes in terms of anatomy. But yeah, when I first started getting the bone changes, I would either fall over or knock on things a whole lot. I'd also have trouble walking in a straight line, which, given my previous sense of balance, was kind of odd for me. It was definitely a humbling experience, and now I'm a lot more clumsier because I'm still not entirely used to this form of walking, but I'm getting there. I'm starting to improve, and honestly, I think it's better than walking the way I did previously, because now it's obviously a non-viable option, but it's also sort of validating, as was the hair change. So yeah, I wouldn't take it back. Everything's worked out pretty well in terms of bone changes. But that pretty much concludes that topic, so next on, I guess we'll move on to hair changes, again, because I actually forgot to cover body hair and facial hair. I only ever actually covered this. So we'll start with facial hair because it's in the screen. So it's softened, it's become lighter, if not entirely clear in most cases, and it continues to do so. So that's good, but it's still there, which is annoying, but HRT doesn't promise it gone. So HRT has lived up to its promise in that regard. It has softened, it has cleared, it has become overall a bit easier to manage. I need to shave less now, which is pleasant because shaving, usually takes time, and hair usually gets in the way when I'm trying to shave, no matter how many times I tie it back or whatever. In fact, hair's getting in my way now. So, that said, we should probably move into body hair, which has also slowed down and cleared up in colour now. So I've got a lot less sort of black hair on my skin, and it's a lot softer, and it takes longer to grow, which means shaving my legs and armpits hasn't been as much of an issue. It's, probably one of the nicer changes because facial hair on me and body hair on me was never particularly that enjoyable. I never really liked having it, which was kind of obvious given it was obviously a trigger for dysphoria. But nonetheless, it was annoying, and it's good to have it impact my life a lot less now. So let's talk about muscle, because, well, it's something that does change, and I think it needs addressing. I'm physically weaker than I was before HRT, though I never was particularly strong. I don't know if I can do pull-ups anymore. I haven't had the equipment to try that. I used to be very capable of it. I wouldn't tire so much, I guess. It was just something that I was okay at doing. But now I'm just not sure, so I'd have to test that out. Nonetheless, it's interesting, if anything, that this change has occurred, because physical strength, as I said, was already weak, has never been much of an issue in my life. I've never really had to deal with physical situations. A, because I'm lazy, and B, because I guess I don't get in that many physical confrontations, which also probably ties into being lazy. So yeah, I'm weaker, but it hasn't particularly been bad, especially considering that it's sort of slimmed my body, made it less masculine appearing. So I was looking at my arm just then. Muscle, despite the little I had, would still appear a bit bigger than it does now. And that's been pleasant because looking more stereotypically feminine, which is validating in itself, rightly or wrongly, no matter how you perceive that to be a legitimate sort of behavior, it's still validating, it's still pleasant to me, and to me that's what matters, because transition really is about doing what I feel is best for me. It is selfish, but it isn't particularly bad for this to be selfish. It's, sometimes you have to care for yourself, because for me, transition was this, or not be alive whatsoever, really, and I made that call, and I fought to get on HRT and start transition, and I did it. And that's probably my greatest achievement, which is kind of off topic to what we were just talking about. So let's return to the muscle changes. Though I did want to mention that at some point in this video, and I guess that happened now. But yes, so muscles, I'm weaker. I am definitely weaker, and it's slimmed my frame, which is nice. I never had broad shoulders, but with muscle changes, sort of shrunk a little. Maybe that might be a bone change. Like I said, I haven't done human bio in a while. Capping off on physical body changes, I should probably go into the sort of fat redistribution. Now, I've maintained a pretty much static weight throughout transition, which hasn't particularly been good, given how little I weigh, and the BMI and yada yada yada, all the sciencey stuff. It's still pleasant though, because of the fat redistribution that's occurred. It's really surprising too. I thought, as somebody who had so little body fat before HRT, I wouldn't experience fat redistribution, but lo and behold I did. I managed to get some fat redistribution on both my thighs and my back end, or my hips, and that's been different, really different, in like a really sort of cool way, because like I said, I've never really experienced much in the way of having body fat. So yeah, it's new. Like half of transition has been new cool features and stuff, like upgrading to a new phone. Though I'm not a phone, I am a human being, if you couldn't tell. But yes, nonetheless, it has been a very sort of fun experience discovering all these sorts of changes, and so far we've only just discussed the physical sides, and that's the safer work sort of non-sexual stuff. So it's exciting. It really is exciting. So now we'll move on to the emotional stuff, and that will hopefully prove just as interesting. So the emotional changes, probably the biggest, feeling okay and actually feeling itself. Before HRT, I was this sort of depressed wreck, and I found it very difficult to feel, if I could at all. And that has changed with HRT, which has been instrumental in bringing my life to life, honestly. I've been able to feel so much more. I've been able to cry. I've been able to feel feelings and feel them to an extent that has been impossible for me previously. And it's, for most people, that's sort of life. That's what happens. You take it for granted. And you should. You should be entitled to feelings. But for me, it's definitely still been very, very new and exciting. Even being able to feel devastation and stuff, rather than just being some sort of husk, more or less. And yeah, you can't pass this sort of change up. It's amazing. And yeah, it's been so, so incredibly helpful in my life, and it's helped keep me here and get a whole new sort of lease on my life in that regard. So on such an expansive topic, it's probably really, really important that I go with specifics. And what better place to start than depression? Now, gender dysphoria is a massive driver for transition, and it's a massive issue that anybody should have to experience it, because I have for most of my life, and it's not pleasant. It is not something I would wish on anybody ever, especially considering on it, and this is where depression comes in. It is very, very easy to encounter depression when you have gender dysphoria, because the constant anxiety and sort of threat you feel, I guess might be the right word, it might not be, you feel makes you very vulnerable to experiencing depression. And as we know, depression can change lives a lot. It can cause so many issues. And thankfully, HRT has really helped me deal with a lot of those issues. So depression has much less of a hold on my life than it does now. And that's good. But it's important to note that HRT is not a wonder drug. It's specialized for particular cases of particular things, and therefore will not solve every issue in your life. And thus, while you have HRT, and it's an amazing experience, don't expect it to solve everything. It's really not going to solve everything. You still have to deal with depression. You still have to address it. You still have to address your anxiety, which I'll go into in a minute. But yes, you really need to temper your expectations, but also note that this could help you in such a way that you aren't capable of knowing until you actually experience it. For trans people, it's a very, very helpful thing to have HRT because it does combat that gender dysphoria and depression that you may experience, and honestly most likely will experience. So, as promised, anxiety. It's not fun. It's truly not fun whatsoever to experience, especially when it's combined with gender dysphoria. For me, having both of those things simultaneously has really not been fun because they both play on perceptions and beliefs. However, I have, for the most part, managed to deal with them. But they're still there, and there's still problems. And anxiety itself, it will influence you in ways that you won't always notice. And that's happened for me, obviously. And that's what this is all about, logging the changes and the things that have happened to me over the last 2 years in this regard. So, anxiety, it's not always obvious, but it has definitely changed my interactions with people. It's altered whether I've come across as really confident or not so much. Not completely terrified, less than the word confident, but more than the word terrified. It's definitely there. It's definitely doing things that I can't always see, but for the most part, I am dealing with it pretty well, and I think I'm having a much easier time of dealing with it now than I was a few years ago. Then again, most of my life now, in fact probably all of it, I've done better than in my teenage years, so yeah, I guess life in general has just become easier on HRT. Nonetheless, I'm not the most well-voiced or charismatic individual. As you can tell by this video, I've been sort of rambling a stream of consciousness rather than speaking a sort of well-voiced sort of script. But then again, that does make it sound more natural, and it also draws attention to the fact that perhaps my development in this regard is stunted thanks to the influence of anxiety and how I've seen myself and how I process things healthily, because there have been some deficiencies in that area. It's obviously serving to show you that these things happen, and more or less this is, an enlightening experience. Though I'd like to move straight into the positive emotional changes I've experienced on HRT, I think I should continue this role of medical sort of issues that I have and my experience with them on HRT. So next up, and thankfully finally, is OCD, which hasn't particularly changed in its exhibition since starting HRT, but I have changed in how I deal with it. So intrusive thoughts, I now have strategies for coping with those, whereas previously I didn't, and it was essentially just a denial mechanism that I would use, which culminated in a breakdown in 2014, as closer friends are aware. But now I'm much more healthier about my approach to my OCD, and it's definitely sort of watched more. It's the lock and key, though it does cause issues still. I don't experience trouble as much with it, but it's still there. And like I said, with depression and anxiety, it's still going to be there. You still have to deal with it, and that's why I have these coping mechanisms, because HRT won't solve everything. Your life is more multifaceted and diverse than just one issue, just like the rest of the world. You can't be reductionist about transition and things like that. It's got so many changes in it, and you have to acknowledge everything that it will do and what it won't do. So yes, I think it was really important that I sort of mentioned these changes. But with that, we can now move into the more pleasant And since it's been mentioned a couple of times already in this video, I'd like to start with how I feel comfortable in my own skin as opposed to prior to HRT. Now, obviously prior I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. Thanks a lot, gender dysphoria. Now I more or less do, though I do feel that there are some more adjustments that would assist in validating how I feel in my own skin. That's not hurting anyone else, so I don't see any need to sort of view it as negative. It's definitely pleasant feeling that feeling, and I'd really, really like to keep feeling that. This has been the most amazing 2 years of my life. I've experienced so much, like for the first time or just again, and gotten more out of it. Feeling comfortable in my own skin has helped that a lot. It has really helped that a lot. In fact, it's been, like I said earlier with another thing, it's been instrumental in helping me feel better and deal better with everything. It's something that I hope everyone in their lives can experience. Another thing that people take for granted, and rightfully so, don't get me wrong, is crying. I couldn't cry prior to HRT. I just couldn't. I tried many, many times, but I couldn't. And now I can. And I find it easier to. I don't have to force it or anything like that. It's something that I can experience quite well. Like, for example, a grandparent passed away a couple of months ago now. When I heard the news, despite having known that this was coming for a while and pretty much been waiting to get this news, I still cried. I still cried a lot. Now, in itself, crying isn't always pleasant, but for me, you've been deprived of crying for so long, it felt really sort of pleasant to being able to actually get those feelings out there and deal with it. So I wouldn't take it back for the world. Most people, or some people rather, will see it as an inconvenience in life, but I guess, given my experience, it's something that is really enriching for me to experience. While I don't want any more dead family members, those moments to cry, they're welcome, I guess, in that sense. And at the opposite end of the spectrum comes happiness, which I've experienced a lot more than any other time in my life, which is really saying nothing because my life isn't that particularly remarkable. I'm just me. But happiness is something that can be more difficult to come by when you have depression. So when it was lessened by HRT, I managed to feel happy a whole lot more. Some of the more mundane sort of things started to take on a sort of happier air to them, though not everybody visits a psychiatrist's office for letters of approval and things like that, so I guess that's not exactly mundane. That is probably one of the times, for clarity, that I felt most happy in my life. I got a particular letter from a psychiatrist, and I stepped outside, and the pure happiness I felt and elation was just incredible. I don't think I'd really felt that in my life before, at no given point, and that's really incredible that I could actually achieve that kind of happiness. And I still do. There are times where I also have that sort of level of happiness. I just can't really remember a time that I'd be willing to name right now. The thing is, those times exist. I can feel happiness, and it's amazing, honestly. And the fact that the littlest things can make me so happy, it's welcome. It's truly, truly welcome. And that's pretty much it in that regard. Not much to say. Happiness is happiness. And more or less, that sort of wraps up this sort of segment on emotional changes, because now I've mentioned how much better I feel in general, happiness, how much depression has been lifted, how I actually have strategies for dealing with things like anxiety and OCD now, and that crying can actually help and make me feel better now, as opposed to my inability to do so previously. So it's little things like that that combine to make more or less an overall sort of positive experience in my mental state, and obviously very welcome. I mean, who wouldn't want such a pleasant experience like that? So, given that information, now I could probably talk about the social changes, of which there haven't been many, because I haven't been treated any differently, particularly since HRT and since presenting as female. In fact, pretty much the only changes that have been, if even a change, that people in their vehicles when they pass by will look at me more. I don't know if this is just my anxiety making me look out for it more, or whether it's something that actually occurs. And then there's the experience that has actually changed, and that's going from being called sir to ma'am, which only happens in a few places where they actually feel they need to distinguish. And that's obviously become a constant change from getting sir'd to ma'am, as opposed to getting called sir sometimes and ma'am others. Now pretty much just constant ma'aming. So that is an accurate change that has occurred, but otherwise there hasn't been that much in the way of changes. In fact, the only real experience that I've encountered that has any gendered merit is catcalling, which has occurred to me once or twice. The second time is debatable as to whether it qualifies, but the first time definitely does, and I won't go into detail because that's irrelevant. But yes, it's something that has happened since presenting as female that never would have happened previously. So that's a real change that has occurred, but above all, really, there hasn't been much of a social change in that regard. I am treated like a person rather than a gender, that sort of thing. And that's good. That's very good. So as opposed to finishing up on the social changes here, I thought it would be best to start discussing the interpersonal questions that individuals had about the transition and such. And that started with how I handle criticism and odd looks from those who don't approve of transition, those specifically who I attended high school with. Now, I attended 2 high schools, so keeping track of everyone who has an opinion about my transition is very difficult, and I don't bother to do it personally. Generally because this is something I am absolutely dead set on. My opinion will never change on. I will continue transitioning no matter what. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So others' opinions on me doing it generally don't matter that much. I will state that reinforcement of my decision is obviously appreciated, and being told you're right is a positive experience for anybody. But yes, it's not an issue as far as I'm concerned whether people agree with it or not. Obviously, I'd love for them to agree with it, but you can't win every battle, and quite frankly it doesn't matter because it's not affecting me. This segues nicely into family, and specifically mine, as to whether they support me or not, and more or less they do. There was a chance, obviously, that I would be rejected and bad things would come of that, but it didn't. That was definitely a pleasant thing. It took them a while to come around. I think sometimes there are still struggles, but for the most part my family is definitely supportive of my transition and such, and I'm still here, and I think that's what matters to them the most. It's good. It's very good having a family that won't go crazy when you tell them such important and life-changing things, and everybody should have a family like that. Obviously, just then I got caught up on the possibility of rejection, which for me was a very terrifying prospect. And so when I told my parents, I told them individually, I told them by letter, and in both cases I immediately retreated to an area where I wouldn't be able to suffer any immediate fallout of them finding out. So that, I guess, helped me feel better about it. And in the end, they had some time to collect their thoughts and approach things a bit more civilly than I was afraid they would. In the end, that was obviously good. And then for any other family members, my parents either informed them or I informed them, and not had any issues, as far as I'm aware, in that regard. So it's always good. With friends, telling friends, still terrifying, but in some cases, I just did it. It was just sort of I can't click for whatever reason right now, but it was just a thing that I said. One person, like, I told them that I really hated what I had down there, and that was enough to let them know the sitch. And then there was another individual, another individual. I was at a gathering, and I just sort of said it as a side note to, like, explain something I'd just said, and continued on. And that was probably the weirdest and probably most callous, if callous is the word, way I've ever come out to someone in that regard. But nonetheless, I've never had any bad reactions from it, and it's been pleasant. I don't think I've lost anybody for it. I still see everybody I've told, so yeah, I'm pretty happy with that result. Changing gear to more intrapersonal questions, I was asked whether I've experienced any emotional moments that have changed me as a person, and honestly, no, there haven't been. Moments where I have changed as a person haven't been so much fueled by emotion as they have just been a sort of learning experience in an environment almost devoid of any particular emotions. And it is what it is, I guess. It'll be interesting if I do have any emotional moments that do change me as a person, and obviously I'd like to share those because those could provide some evidence for something or help someone out. But as it stands, no, that hasn't happened, and it's something that could, I guess, but we get to see. Moving on, I was asked to discuss how I use pronouns in terms of past events, so ones that were pre-transition and such. For me, personally, in some cases, particularly those where I'm with individuals I already know, I will completely disassociate myself from what I was then, and I will use male pronouns. This is primarily because I don't identify as pretty much anything I was when I was younger and presenting as male, so it makes things a little easier. I'm not denying my existence, rather I'm saying that I've grown and evolved since those times, and thus I don't feel much connection to them. In situations with those that I don't know particularly well, or just other situations, I'll either not refer to past events, or I'll refer to them in a female pronoun set, which can also be the case with those that I know and am closer to. It does help to have that history, in a sense, to know where you've come from, even if you don't identify as that anymore. With these questions answered, I'd now like to move on to the sexual changes that have come with HRT. If you've seen enough and you don't want to see this bit, feel free to head away now. But if you would like to hear about this sort of stuff, then let's begin. The sexual changes of HRT that I have experienced have largely been concerned with my genitalia, with the outliers being discussed at the end of this section. My penis and my testicles have shrunk, which has been good for me because I was delivered a lot of gender dysphoria by having them, and the smaller they are, the less of a problem they are for me. Erections have become a very rare occurrence for me because thanks to HRT, I no longer receive morning wood or random erections. I only get erections when I want one, and that's basically never, so I'm pretty much free of them. They used to cause me a great amount of distress when I would have them, and I'm glad that I could experience getting around them because they just weren't fun for me. As for testicles, they produced little to no sperm whatsoever, as far as I'm aware, as now ejaculation involves just, if anything, a small amount of clear fluid. Such a change is compounded by the fact that my sex drive is lower and different to how it was previously. It is different in the sense that I no longer have the sort of urge that I had when I had testosterone in my system. When I did, it would be this sort of powerful, almost all-consuming urge that would control a whole lot of my behavior, or at least felt like it controlled a whole lot of my behavior. Now, if I feel aroused, then it's more of a just sort of thing that might be there, and it's a lot more casual. I don't need to give in so much as I felt I did with testosterone. It is reduced in the sense that I no longer feel the urge to engage in sexual behavior as much, which, as with the rest of these genitalia changes, has definitely been very welcome for me. The sensation and feeling that I have in my genitalia has become more intense and more obvious when I experience it, despite the fact that I experience it less often. This has been a pleasant change, especially given that pleasure is no longer centralized in a particular area, it's now spread across the entire body. Now, so far I've only highlighted the physical changes in this area. I'd now like to move on to the sexuality element, which in itself is not a change. Instead, what it is more of a opportunity that I've been given by HRT, allowing me to actually consider what I identify as. For those interested, that label is pansexual. But the point I'm making here is that because so much of my worry was sort of taken away by getting onto HRT, I was able to think about these things, was able to process how I felt and what I felt, and thus I get a better grasp of myself as a person. That wraps up my HRT experience over the last 2 years. It was really comprehensive, I feel, and thus I hope you really got something out of it, because if it helps even one person, that's what matters, really.